Mark, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. I understand you've had some strange supernatural experiences in Bali.
In Bali and in other parts of Indonesia. I lived there for 10 years. I was the chief marketing consultant to the government of Indonesia. And while I was there, you're absolutely right, discovered some very bizarre things, and very strange things were happening all around my wife and I, and to my wife and I,
Oh, my goodness.
as you can see from my book.
There's some great stories in your books, especially a particularly chilling vampire story, which we're going to get into. But let's start off with President Ronald Reagan and his near-death experience during a voodoo ceremony. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I tell you, it's absolutely true, and that's the lead story in my book, Scared to Death. We were living in Bali at the time, and we kept hearing this persistent rumor and decided that we really needed to see why we were hearing this persistent rumor. We tracked it to a very luxurious resort, the Pertamina Cottages, a very mature, one of the first luxury resorts, and it's near the Bali International Airport. Incidentally, that's where Ronald and Nancy Reagan stayed when he was president in '84, when he paid a state visit to Indonesia to visit the then president Suharto. He had a stay over of a couple of days in Bali. That's where he stayed. We went to the cottage. We interviewed everybody. To make the very long story a little bit shorter, we were finally able to track it to the Secret Service physician in attendance while the Reagans were visiting. Now, what happened? There was a state dinner that night in Bali. Reagan they sampled some of the local food. It's a bit spicy. He had an upset stomach. They called for the doctor. Secret Service brought in the attending physician, who was the Balinese doctor that we interviewed. What happened from that point on is how this whole incident was set into motion. He was giving some prescription and some pills like antacid to calm the stomach, and he made an offhand remark that really started it all. He said, "If my uncle was here, you wouldn't need these pills." Well, Nancy Reagan said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, my uncle is a shaman. He's a witch doctor. He does magic." Now, I don't know if you remember, but when the Reagans were in the White House, they were very much into the occult.
Oh, sure. I remember the stories about Nancy Reagan consulting an astrologist.
You're absolutely right. In fact, when Reagan was sworn in, when he took the oath of office to become president, normally it's taken by the Constitution at noon. But their numerologists and astrologers told them, well, if you go in, and I don't remember the exact time, but it was a bizarre time, like 12:07 and a half, and that's the time he was sworn in. They delayed it because of their belief in the occult. They never did anything without consulting their astrologer, their numerologist, and so they were very much attuned to hearing this doctor say, "My uncle is a witch doctor." They said, "Can we meet him?" And this witch doctor was summoned from the villages, from a remote village, and this is a very simple villager. I mean, a toothless, long hair, wearing an old, worn-out T-shirt, and he showed up, and he said to the Reagans, "What do you want?" And they said, "What can you do?" He said, "I can show you the future." And that's all they needed to hear, Ghosty. The guy, they said, "Show me." He sat cross-legged on the floor, and we were there in that room where it happened. He sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the sofa. The Reagans were seated on the sofa. He began to put them through, I guess you and I would call it, light hypnosis or a meditation exercise, guided imagery. Then the story gets real strange and a little bit vague. People who were in the room report that Ronald Reagan became I don't know, there was some kind of an aura. His people that were looking at him, the view of him got distorted. It was almost as if he became semi-transparent. I mean, it was a very strange thing that happened in the room. Nancy was able to, she woke up as she was supposed to, but Ronald Reagan went a little too deep, a little too far, a little too long, and they had trouble bringing him back. He finally did come back, thank God, and he was changed. There was something different about him. Okay, now we're going to fast forward 6 months ahead.
Okay.
6 months later, he meets in Reykjavik, Iceland, with Mikhail Gorbachev. And Reagan was the warrior. He was a warrior, tough on the then USSR and a warrior. Yet when he got to Reykjavik, he completely did a reversal. He stunned and surprised even close, intimate staff members, and he opted for peace. Now, when I put all the pieces of this together, the doctor, the Secret Service doctor, took my wife and I back to the village, and we actually interviewed the witch doctor that conducted the ceremony. Now, the question that was burning inside of me was, what did Reagan see that changed him?
Absolutely.
Man, Ghosty, I looked at this witch doctor and I said, what did you show him? And here is this man. He looked at me with the wisdom of the ages etched into his face. He looked into me, a little smile came on his face, and this is what he said. He said, I showed him what he needed to see. And I got goosebumps. It was just amazing. I don't know what he saw, but he changed. I verified he went through the experience. Something bizarre, supernatural happened, and it changed the President of the United States, ultimately changed the world. And that is just the most amazing discovery I made in Indonesia.
It's too bad we don't have that witch doctor now consulting on foreign policy.
Wouldn't that be nice? We could sure use him today, couldn't we?
Let's talk about the mysterious sexual enhancement formula that I guess you can only get in Bali, or did it originate in Bali, and where can I get it?
It's called Susuk, S-U-S-U-K. It's an Indonesian word for a certain type of magic. And while it's applied very much in Bali, it is also used in other parts of Indonesia. And in order to profit from it or gain from it or use it, you need to go to one of several small villages in Java, because Java is where you are given the power of Susuk. And what it is, it's a tiny piece of something precious, gold, usually gold, sometimes diamond if you can afford it, smaller than a grain of sand. And what happens is the witch doctor, after praying and meditating, puts this little, we'll call it a grain of sand, he puts this little fleck on the tip of a finger, and then puts his finger up next to your eye, and just moves his finger in a little circle and then removes it, and that little grain of sand has miraculously gone beneath your skin. It's under the surface of your skin. And what it does, it's an attractant. Business people in Indonesia and business people from other parts of Southeast Asia come there to get it, because what happens, if it's near your eye and you're looking at somebody, you can charm them and they become spellbound.
Oh, I like this, Mark.
You like this one, don't you? Well, I'm going to give you the next one. You'll like it even more because, you're doing a great interview and you got a radio show. You'll like this one because what they'll do is they'll put it next to your mouth, and when you speak, everybody believes you.
Oh, I needed that during the fundraiser.
You do need that. And they'll put it next to your private parts for obvious reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And that would have the same kind of enhancing effect?
Yes, sir. And we saw it work. When we lived in Bali, we had an Australian friend. He was from Melbourne. He was very wealthy. He and his father owned a commercial office cleaning business, millionaires. He had a Jag and a Mercedes back home, a big house, wife, 4 kids. He comes to Bali by himself to blow off a little steam, drink a few beers. Australians love Bali. And he's in a club. In fact, it was the club where the bombing was. That bombing in Bali was just a short walk from where my wife and I used to live. So we know the neighborhood intimately. He's in that bar, and a lady comes up to him. She's a hooker. He doesn't know it. He's charmed. And within 2 weeks, he transferred $500,000 out of his Australian bank account into her bank account. And a friend of ours who happened to be the bank manager where these transactions were taking place in Bali calls us. He says, "Listen," he says, "something's going on. There's an Australian guy. I'm sure she's a hooker. I'm sure he's being, taken for a ride." And we had friends who were detectives in Bali. They checked out the lady. Sure enough, she was a hooker. She wasn't even giving this poor Australian her correct name. We invited him over to our house. We told him what was going on, and he went berserk. He wouldn't believe us. Ultimately, he lost all his money. His father disowned him, kicked him out of the family business. His wife came over. He wouldn't even listen to his wife. You couldn't reason with the man. He lost his money, lost his wife, lost his 4 kids, lost his business, his parents, and he ultimately lost his mind. He was so entranced by this woman that he couldn't live without her, and she was a hooker. She wiped out his bank account, and she was, around with other people and with her pimp, and he couldn't handle it. And you can see him sometimes. You can see George every once in a while in the back alleys of Bali looking for her, and you can see a look in his eye. The man is stark raving mad.